Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her expensive black taxi and looked up at the grand buildings of London with a frown on her face. She was 28 years old and came from one of the richest families in America. Her father owned several big companies and had always told her that money could solve any problem. Sarah believed this with all her heart. She wore a designer dress that cost more than most people earned in a month. Her handbag was made by a famous Italian company, and her shoes sparkled with tiny diamonds. Everything about Sarah screamed wealth and privilege. She expected everyone to notice her and treat her like royalty. For the past 3 days, Sarah had been staying at the most expensive hotel in London. She had already made life difficult for everyone who worked there. When the hotel staff brought her breakfast 5 minutes late, she screamed at them for 20 minutes. When the cleaning lady accidentally moved one of her perfume bottles, she demanded the woman be fired immediately. At restaurants, Sarah would send food back to the kitchen 3 or 4 times, even when nothing was wrong with it. She enjoyed watching the waiters run around trying to please her. She never said thank you or please to anyone. In her mind, these people were there to serve her and nothing more. Sarah had grown up believing that poor people deserved their situation and rich people like her were naturally better than everyone else. Her father had taught her that successful people took what they wanted and weak people got nothing. She had never worked a real job or struggled for anything in her life. The taxi driver had been polite and friendly during the ride, but Sarah did not tip him even 1 penny. She simply walked away while he was still trying to help her with her bags. This was normal behavior for Sarah. She saw service workers as objects, not as real people with feelings. Now she stood in front of Buckingham Palace ready to take some photos for her social media accounts. Sarah had over 50,000 followers who loved to see her luxury lifestyle. She posted pictures of expensive meals, designer clothes, and exotic vacation spots. Her followers thought she lived a perfect life. Sarah walked through the gates of Buckingham Palace with her phone already recording a video. She spoke to her camera like she was talking to close friends. She complained about how small London was compared to New York. She said the weather was terrible and the food was boring. Everything had to be perfect for Sarah, or she would complain about it. Other tourists were taking photos and enjoying their visit, but Sarah was already bored. She had visited many famous places around the world, but nothing ever impressed her anymore. She expected every experience to be amazing without any effort from her side. As she walked around the palace grounds, Sarah noticed other tourists being respectful and quiet. This annoyed her because she wanted attention. She was used to being the center of attention wherever she went. Her loud voice and demanding behavior usually made sure everyone noticed her. Sarah saw families with children who were excited to see the famous palace. She rolled her eyes at their happiness. She thought they were simple people who got excited about small things. In her mind, only expensive and exclusive things were worth getting excited about. The morning sun was shining brightly, and the palace looked beautiful, but Sarah was already planning to leave soon. She wanted to get some good photos for her social media, and then move on to shopping at the most expensive stores in London. She had no interest in the history or culture of the place. Sarah checked her appearance in her phone camera and fixed her hair. She was ready to find the perfect spot for her photos. She had no idea that her next actions would change her life forever and teach her a lesson she would never forget. James Thompson stood perfectly still outside Buckingham Palace like a statue made of flesh and bone. He was 26 years old and had been serving as one of the Queen's guards for 3 years. His red uniform was spotless and pressed to perfection. Every button shined brightly in the morning sun. His tall black hat sat perfectly straight on his head. James had joined the British Army when he was 18 years old. He came from a working-class family in Manchester, where his father worked in a factory and his mother cleaned offices at night. They had taught him the value of hard work, respect, and duty to his country. These lessons shaped James into the disciplined soldier he became. The training to become a Queen's Guard was incredibly difficult. James had to learn to stand completely still for hours without moving a single muscle. He practiced controlling his breathing so that his chest would barely rise and fall. He learned to keep his eyes focused straight ahead, no matter what happened around him. During his training, James stood in the rain for 6 hours without moving. He stood in blazing hot sun until sweat poured down his face, but he never wiped it away. He learned to ignore pain, hunger, and discomfort. His instructors taught him that the Queen's Guards represented the dignity and strength of the British Crown. Every morning, James woke up at 5 o'clock to prepare for his duty. He polished his uniform until it gleamed. He cleaned his rifle until it sparkled. He practiced his movements until they were perfect. James took pride in every detail of his appearance and performance. When James stood guard at the palace, he became more than just a soldier. He became a symbol of British tradition and honor. Thousands of tourists came every day to see the famous red uniformed guards. James knew that people from all over the world were watching him and judging his country by his behavior. Children often tried to make James smile or laugh. They would make funny faces, jump up and down, or tell jokes. James would see them from the corner of his eye, but his face never changed expression. Some tourists would wave at him or try to shake his hand. James remained perfectly still like a statue. Adult tourists sometimes became frustrated when James did not react to them. They would call his name or try to get his attention. Some would even try to touch his uniform or his rifle. Through all of this, James never moved. His training had taught him that his duty was more important than any individual person's desire for attention. James understood that his job was not just about standing still. He was protecting one of the most important buildings in Britain. He was trained to watch for any real threats or dangers. His eyes constantly scanned the crowd, looking for anything unusual or suspicious. He could identify troublemakers quickly and call for help if needed. The other guards respected James because he never broke character. Some newer guards would occasionally smile or move slightly when tourists did something funny. But James was known for his perfect discipline. He had never once moved from his position, unless it was absolutely necessary. James felt proud to serve his country in this way. He knew that millions of people around the world recognized the Queen's Guards as symbols of British excellence. When tourists took photos with him, they were taking home a piece of British history and tradition. On this particular morning, James felt the same sense of duty and pride he felt every day. He had no idea that his training and discipline were about to be tested in a way he had never experienced before. He stood perfectly still, watching the crowd of tourists approach, not knowing that one of them would soon change everything. Sarah walked toward the guard with her phone held high, ready to take the perfect selfie. She had seen other tourists taking pictures with the famous red uniformed guards and decided she wanted one too. But Sarah expected more than just a simple photo. She wanted the guard to interact with her and make her picture special. She positioned herself right next to James and started taking selfies from different angles. She made silly faces and peace signs with her fingers. She expected James to at least smile or acknowledge her presence. When he remained completely still like a statue, Sarah became confused. Sarah was not used to being ignored by anyone. In her world, people always paid attention to her because of her money and status. She started talking to James in a loud voice, trying to get his attention. She told him how rich she was and how important her family was in America. When James continued to stare straight ahead without moving, Sarah became frustrated. She began making rude comments about his appearance. She said his uniform looked silly and old-fashioned. She called him names and made fun of his serious expression. Still, James did not react at all. Other tourists nearby began to notice Sarah's behavior. Some of them looked shocked at how rude she was being to the guard. A few people started recording videos with their phones because they could tell something bad was about to happen. Children stopped playing and stared at the angry woman yelling at the soldier. Sarah moved closer to James and started waving her hands in front of his face. She snapped her fingers near his ears and made loud noises, trying to break his concentration. She had never met anyone who could ignore her completely, and it made her furious. The morning sun was getting hotter and more tourists were gathering around to watch the scene. Sarah felt embarrassed that so many people were watching her fail to get the guards' attention. Her face turned red with anger and humiliation. She was used to being in control of every situation. Sarah began shouting at James, calling him stupid and worthless. She said he was probably too poor and uneducated to understand who she was. She threatened to have him fired from his job. She said her father had connections that could ruin his career. Through all of this, James remained perfectly still. The crowd of tourists grew larger as word spread that something was happening. People from different countries watched in amazement as the wealthy American woman became more and more angry. Some tourists shook their heads in disapproval of her behavior. Sarah realized that everyone was watching her, and this made her even more desperate to get a reaction from James. In her mind, she had to win this battle of wills. She could not accept that a simple guard could ignore someone as important as her. Finally, Sarah lost all control of her temper. She had never been so angry in her entire life. The combination of embarrassment, frustration, and wounded pride pushed her over the edge. She raised her right hand high in the air and brought it down hard across James' face. The sound of the slap echoed through the courtyard like a gunshot. Every tourist in the area heard it clearly. James' head moved slightly from the force of the blow, but he quickly returned to his original position. His cheek turned red where Sarah had hit him. The crowd of tourists gasped in shock and horror. Several people screamed. Children began crying. Everyone knew that something terrible had just happened. Sarah stood there breathing heavily, not yet understanding what she had done. She had no idea her life was about to change forever. James felt the sharp sting of Sarah's hand across his face, but his training took control immediately. For exactly 3 seconds, he remained in his guard position, processing what had just happened. His cheek burned from the slap, but his expression did not change. The crowd around him stood frozen in shocked silence. Then James moved with the smooth precision of a trained soldier. He stepped forward, breaking his statue-like pose for the first time in hours. His movements were calm and controlled despite what had just happened to him. Years of military training had prepared him for situations like this. James looked directly at Sarah for the first time. His eyes were steady and serious. Sarah suddenly realized she was looking at a real person, not just a tourist attraction. She saw intelligent strength and authority in his gaze. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly afraid. James spoke in a clear, strong voice that carried across the courtyard. He told Sarah that she was under arrest for assaulting a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces. His words were formal and official. Every tourist in the area could hear him clearly. Sarah stared at James with her mouth open in shock. She could not believe that the guard was actually speaking to her. She had wanted his attention, but not like this. She began to realize that something very serious was happening, but her brain could not process it properly. James reached for his radio and called for police backup. He spoke in military code that most civilians could not understand. Within seconds, his call was answered by police dispatch. They confirmed that officers were already on their way to the palace. Sarah finally found her voice and began screaming at James. She told him he could not arrest her because she was an American citizen. She said he was just a stupid guard with no real authority. She demanded that he let her go immediately, or she would sue him and the entire British government. James remained calm and professional despite Sarah's shouting. He explained that any person could make a citizen's arrest when they witnessed a serious crime. He told her that assaulting a member of the military was a very serious offense in the United Kingdom. The crowd of tourists began taking pictures and videos of the scene. Dozens of phones were pointed at Sarah as she continued to scream and threaten James. Some people were already posting the videos on social media. The incident was being broadcast to the world in real time. Within 3 minutes, police officers arrived at the scene. They had been patrolling nearby and responded quickly to James' call for help. The officers were experienced in dealing with difficult tourists, but they had rarely seen anything like this situation. James gave the police officers a clear and detailed report of what had happened. He spoke like the professional soldier he was trained to be. He explained that Sarah had been harassing him for several minutes before she physically assaulted him. The police officers approached Sarah with handcuffs ready. Sarah began backing away from them, screaming that they could not touch her. She said she was innocent and that James was lying about everything. She demanded to speak to someone from the American embassy immediately. One of the police officers tried to calm Sarah down and explain her rights under British law. But Sarah was too angry and scared to listen. She continued screaming and trying to run away from the officers. Finally, the police had no choice but to physically restrain Sarah. They placed handcuffs on her wrists while she kicked and screamed. Her expensive designer handbag fell to the ground, spilling makeup, credit cards, and cash across the pavement. The crowd of tourists watched in amazement as Sarah was led away toward the police car. She continued shouting threats and insults at everyone around her. Some tourists applauded James for his professionalism during the entire incident. James returned to his guard position, as if nothing had happened. His face was still red from the slap, but his expression was calm and controlled. He had done his duty and protected the dignity of his position and his country. By 6 o'clock that evening, the video of Sarah slapping James had been viewed over 2 million times across different social media platforms. The incident had been filmed by at least 20 different tourists from multiple angles. Each video showed clearly what Sarah had done and how professionally James had handled the situation. The first video was posted on social media just 10 minutes after Sarah was arrested. It was filmed by a teenage tourist from Germany who had been visiting London with his family. His short 15-second video captured the exact moment of the slap and James' immediate response. Within an hour, news websites around the world were picking up the story. Headlines read entitled "American Tourist Attacks Royal Guard" and "American Harris Assaults British Soldier." The story was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Television news channels began broadcasting the video during their evening programs. News anchors discussed the incident with shock and disbelief. Many commentators praised James for his self-control and professionalism under such difficult circumstances. Internet users quickly discovered Sarah's full name and background information. They found her social media accounts, her family business, and details about her wealthy lifestyle. Her Instagram account was filled with photos of expensive vacations, designer clothes, and luxury cars. People began investigating Sarah's past behavior and found many stories of her treating service workers badly. Hotel employees, restaurant staff, and shop workers shared their own experiences dealing with Sarah. These stories painted a picture of someone who had been rude and entitled her entire life. The comment sections under the videos were filled with angry messages from people around the world. Users from Britain expressed outrage that a foreign tourist had disrespected one of their beloved Queen's guards. Americans were embarrassed that someone from their country had behaved so badly. International news networks picked up the story and broadcast it in dozens of different languages. The video was shown on television screens in Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. Sarah had become famous around the world, but for all the wrong reasons. Social media influencers and celebrities began sharing the video with their own comments. Most of them criticized Sarah's behavior and praised James' professionalism. Some famous people used the incident to talk about respect for military personnel and service workers. By midnight, the main video had been shared over 100,000 times. New videos kept appearing as more tourists posted their footage of the incident. Each video showed the same thing, but from different angles and distances. Sarah's family business began receiving angry phone calls and emails from people who had seen the video. Customers threatened to cancel their contracts and take their business elsewhere. The company's stock price began falling as investors worried about the negative publicity. James became an internet hero overnight. People praised his disciplined training and professional response to being assaulted. Many comments called him a perfect example of British military excellence and dignity. Memes and jokes about the incident began appearing on social media. Most of them made fun of Sarah's entitled behavior and celebrated James as a symbol of proper conduct. Sarah had become a laughingstock around the world. News reporters began investigating Sarah's background more deeply. They discovered that she had been involved in several other incidents of rude behavior during her travels. Restaurant managers and hotel staff came forward to share their stories about dealing with her. The American Embassy in London was contacted by dozens of reporters asking for comments about the incident. Embassy officials refused to make any statements, but privately, they were embarrassed by Sarah's behavior. Late-night television shows began making jokes about entitled tourists and the importance of respecting local customs. Comedians used the incident to discuss broader issues about wealth privilege and proper behavior when traveling. By the end of the first day, the story had been covered by every major news outlet in the world. Sarah had achieved the fame she always wanted, but it was the worst kind of fame possible. She had become a symbol of everything wrong with entitled wealthy tourists who think money makes them better than everyone else. Sarah sat in a cold gray cell at the London police station, staring at the concrete walls around her. She had never been in jail before and could not believe this was happening to her. The cell smelled bad, and the thin mattress on the metal bed was nothing like the luxury hotels she was used to. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled and dirty from struggling with the police officers. Her designer makeup was smeared across her face from crying and screaming. For the first time in her life, Sarah looked ordinary and helpless instead of wealthy and powerful. The police had taken away her phone, purse, and jewelry when they processed her arrest. Sarah felt naked without her expensive accessories that usually showed everyone how important she was. She demanded to make a phone call, but the officers told her she would have to wait. After 6 hours in the cell, Sarah was finally allowed to call her father in America. She cried into the phone, explaining what had happened and begging him to fix everything. Her father was shocked and angry, but he promised to send his best lawyer to London immediately. The next morning, Sarah's lawyer arrived at the police station. Richard Goldman was one of the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in New York. He had helped wealthy clients get out of trouble many times before. But when he met with Sarah, he looked worried. Goldman explained to Sarah that British law was very different from American law. He told her that assaulting a member of the armed forces was considered a serious crime in the United Kingdom. The penalties could include several months in prison and heavy fines. Sarah could not believe what she was hearing. She told Goldman that her father had spent millions of dollars on legal fees over the years and expected better results. She demanded that he make the charges disappear immediately. Goldman shook his head sadly and explained that money could not solve this problem. The prosecutor assigned to Sarah's case was Margaret Williams, a tough, experienced lawyer who had handled hundreds of assault cases. Williams had watched the videos of the incident and was determined to make sure Sarah faced the full consequences of her actions. During the bail hearing, Sarah appeared before Judge Harrison Mitchell, a respected magistrate who had been on the bench for 20 years. Judge Mitchell had seen many cases involving wealthy defendants who thought money could buy them freedom. Goldman argued that Sarah should be released on bail because she was not a danger to the public. He offered to pay any amount of money the court requested. He emphasized Sarah's lack of previous criminal record and her status as a foreign tourist. Prosecutor Williams argued that Sarah was a flight risk who might try to leave the country before her trial. She pointed out that Sarah had shown no remorse for her actions and had continued to be rude and disrespectful to police officers and court staff. Judge Mitchell listened carefully to both arguments before making his decision. He set Sarah's bail at £50,000, which was much higher than Goldman had expected. The judge also ordered Sarah to surrender her passport and report to the police station every day. Sarah was furious when she heard the bail amount and the conditions. She stood up in court and began shouting at the judge, calling him unfair and biased. Judge Mitchell warned her that such behavior could result in additional charges for contempt of court. Goldman quickly paid the bail money and got Sarah released from jail. But outside the courthouse, Sarah continued to complain and make threats. She said she would sue everyone involved in her case and promised that her father's money would destroy their careers. The American embassy had been contacted about Sarah's case, but they could only provide basic consular services. Embassy officials explained that they could not interfere with the British legal system or provide special treatment for American citizens who broke local laws. Goldman spent the next several days researching British assault laws and trying to find ways to reduce Sarah's charges. But every legal expert he consulted told him the same thing. The video evidence was clear, and the case against Sarah was very strong. Sarah stayed at the most expensive hotel in London while waiting for her trial date, but even her luxury suite could not protect her from the reality of her situation. For the first time in her privileged life, Sarah was facing consequences that money could not fix. Every major television network around the world was now covering Sarah's story as their top news item. CNN, BBC, Fox News, and dozens of other channels showed the video of her slapping James every hour. News anchors discussed the incident with legal experts and social commentators who all condemned her behavior. Late-night television hosts made Sarah the target of their opening jokes every single night. Jimmy Fallon, Stephen Colbert, and other famous comedians created entire comedy segments about entitled tourists and spoiled rich people. Sarah had become the most mocked person in America. Her family's business, Mitchell Industries, began losing major contracts as companies rushed to distance themselves from the scandal. 3 large corporations canceled deals worth over $10 million in the first week alone. The company's stock price dropped by 30% as investors sold their shares. Sarah's social media accounts became battlegrounds where thousands of angry people posted comments calling her names and expressing their disgust with her behavior. Her Instagram account, which once had 50,000 followers, now had over 200,000, but they were all there to criticize her. The hashtag #SlapItGuardSarah began trending on Twitter and remained in the top 10 topics for over a week. People from every country shared the video and added their own comments about respect, dignity, and proper behavior when traveling abroad. Hotel staff from around the world began sharing their own stories about dealing with Sarah during her previous vacations. Workers from Paris, Rome, Tokyo, and other cities came forward with tales of her rude behavior and impossible demands. These stories painted a picture of someone who had been terrible to service workers for years. Restaurant managers posted reviews and receipts showing how Sarah had treated their staff badly and refused to pay proper tips. Some establishments banned her from returning even though she had spent thousands of dollars there in the past. Sarah's wealthy friends began avoiding her completely. People who had attended her parties and vacationed with her now refused to answer her phone calls. Her social circle disappeared overnight as everyone tried to protect their own reputations. The story reached international magazines and newspapers. Time magazine ran a cover story about entitled behavior among wealthy tourists. The article used Sarah as the main example of how money and privilege could corrupt people's basic sense of decency and respect. British newspapers were especially harsh in their coverage of Sarah. The Daily Mail, The Sun, and The Guardian all published detailed articles about her background and behavior. British citizens were particularly offended that a foreign tourist had disrespected one of their beloved Queen's Guards. Social media influencers with millions of followers began making videos about the incident. They used Sarah's story to discuss broader topics like wealth inequality, entitled behavior, and the importance of treating all people with respect, regardless of their job or social status. Sarah's father tried to control the damage to the family business by hiring expensive public relations firms. But every attempt to improve their image failed because the video evidence was so clear and damaging. No amount of money could change what people had seen. Universities began using Sarah's case in their business ethics and sociology classes. Professors showed the video to students as an example of how not to behave when traveling abroad. Sarah had become a textbook example of entitled behavior. International travel websites and guidebooks added warnings about respecting local customs and treating service workers properly. Many of these warnings specifically mentioned Sarah's case as an example of what could happen when tourists behaved badly in foreign countries. The British Tourism Board actually saw an increase in visitors who wanted to see the famous Queen's Guards after the incident. Many tourists specifically asked to take photos with the guards while being respectful and polite. James had become a symbol of British dignity and professionalism. Sarah's mugshot from her arrest was published in newspapers around the world. The image showed her with messy hair, smeared makeup, and an angry expression. It was completely different from the glamorous photos she usually posted on social media. Even celebrities began commenting on the story. Famous actors, musicians, and athletes posted messages on social media supporting James and criticizing Sarah's behavior. Sarah found herself being condemned by people she had always admired and wanted to meet. The incident had completely destroyed Sarah's reputation and turned her into one of the most hated people in the world. She had gone from being a wealthy socialite to being a global symbol of everything wrong with entitled rich people. 3 weeks after the incident, Sarah found herself sitting in a British courtroom facing Judge Harrison Mitchell again. The courtroom was packed with reporters, lawyers, and curious observers who wanted to see justice served. Camera crews waited outside since filming was not allowed inside the courthouse. Sarah wore a simple black dress instead of her usual designer clothes. Her lawyer had advised her to look humble and sorry for what she had done. But Sarah still carried herself with an air of superiority that everyone in the courtroom could see. Prosecutor Margaret Williams presented the case against Sarah with clear evidence that no one could dispute. She showed the videos of the incident from multiple angles proving exactly what had happened. The slap was visible from every direction, and the sound could be heard clearly. James Thompson took the witness stand wearing his military dress uniform with all his medals and honors displayed. He answered every question with the same dignity and professionalism he had shown during the incident. He described what happened in simple, clear language without showing any anger or emotion. James explained that he had been doing his duty as a Queen's Guard when Sarah began harassing him. He testified that she had called him names, made rude comments about his appearance, and tried to distract him from his responsibilities. He said the physical assault came after several minutes of verbal abuse. When asked how he felt about being slapped, James replied that he was trained to handle difficult situations with discipline and restraint. He said his main concern was protecting the dignity of his position and the honor of the British military. The courtroom was impressed by his calm, professional response. Sarah's lawyer, Richard Goldman, tried his best to defend her, but the evidence was overwhelming. He argued that Sarah had been under stress from traveling and was not used to British customs. He claimed that the slap was just a momentary loss of control and not representative of her true character. Goldman presented character witnesses who testified about Sarah's charitable donations and community involvement in America. But these positive statements were quickly overshadowed by testimony from service workers who had dealt with her rude behavior in the past. Several hotel employees, restaurant staff, and shop workers testified about their experiences with Sarah. They described her as demanding, insulting, and completely lacking in basic respect for working people. Their testimony painted a picture of someone who regularly mistreated others. When Sarah took the witness stand to testify in her own defense, she made several critical mistakes. Instead of showing genuine remorse, she continued to justify her actions and blame others for what had happened. She claimed that James should have responded to her attempts at conversation. Sarah told the court that she was used to better customer service and felt frustrated when James ignored her. She said she never intended to cause serious harm and thought the slap was just a way to get his attention. Her testimony showed that she still did not understand the seriousness of her actions. Under cross-examination by Prosecutor Williams, Sarah became defensive and argumentative. She raised her voice and made excuses for her behavior instead of taking responsibility. Her performance on the witness stand convinced everyone that she was not truly sorry. Judge Mitchell listened carefully to all the testimony and evidence before making his decision. He said that assault on a member of the armed forces was a serious crime that threatened public order and respect for military personnel. He noted that Sarah's lack of remorse made her actions even more concerning. The judge sentenced Sarah to 4 months in prison, followed by 6 months of community service. He also imposed a fine of £20,000 and banned her from returning to the United Kingdom for 5 years. The sentence was harsher than Goldman had hoped, but not as severe as it could have been. Sarah broke down crying when she heard the sentence. For the first time, she seemed to understand that her actions had real consequences that money could not fix. She was immediately taken into custody to begin serving her prison sentence. Outside the courthouse, reporters interviewed James about the verdict. He said he was satisfied that justice had been served and hoped the case would remind everyone about the importance of mutual respect. He returned to his duties at Buckingham Palace the next day. The trial verdict was reported around the world as a victory for justice and dignity over wealth and privilege. Many people expressed satisfaction that Sarah had finally faced consequences for her entitled behavior. 6 months after the incident, James Thompson received a special commendation from the British Army for his exceptional conduct during the assault. The ceremony took place at Buckingham Palace with senior military officers and government officials in attendance. James was praised for maintaining his discipline and professionalism under extremely difficult circumstances. The Queen herself sent a personal message congratulating James for upholding the honor and dignity of the Queen's Guards. His story became part of military training programs as an example of how soldiers should respond to provocation and assault. James had become a symbol of everything good about British military service. James continued his duties at Buckingham Palace, where he was now recognized by tourists from around the world. Many visitors specifically asked to take respectful photos with him and thanked him for his service. Children would wave politely and adults would nod with respect when they saw him. Meanwhile, Sarah served her full 4-month prison sentence in a British women's correctional facility. Prison life was the complete opposite of everything she had known before. She shared a small cell with another prisoner, ate simple food from metal trays, and wore plain prison uniforms instead of designer clothes. The other prisoners knew exactly who Sarah was because her story had been so widely reported. Some of them resented her wealth and privilege, while others felt sorry for how far she had fallen. Sarah learned to keep quiet and stay out of trouble to avoid making her situation worse. During her time in prison, Sarah was forced to do manual labor cleaning floors, washing dishes, and working in the prison laundry. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to work hard for basic necessities. She began to realize how difficult life was for people without money and privilege. Sarah also attended mandatory counseling sessions where she was forced to examine her behavior and attitudes. The prison counselor helped her understand how her wealth and upbringing had made her feel superior to other people. These sessions were painful but necessary for Sarah to begin changing. When Sarah was released from prison, she faced 6 months of community service working at homeless shelters and food banks in London. She had to serve meals to people who had nothing and clean facilities that helped the most vulnerable members of society. At first, Sarah hated the community service and felt humiliated by the work, but gradually she began to see the people she was helping as real human beings with their own stories and struggles. She learned that many of them were hardworking people who had simply faced bad luck or difficult circumstances. One elderly homeless man named William taught Sarah the most important lesson of her life. William had been a successful businessman who lost everything when his company failed during an economic recession. He showed Sarah that anyone could lose their wealth and status through circumstances beyond their control. Sarah completed her community service and returned to America as a completely changed person. She was no longer the arrogant, entitled woman who had slapped a Queen's Guard. She had learned humility, compassion, and respect for all people, regardless of their social status or wealth. Back in America, Sarah found that her reputation was still damaged, and many people remembered her as the woman who had disgraced herself in London. Her family's business had recovered somewhat, but they had lost millions of dollars and many important clients because of her actions. Sarah decided to dedicate her life to making amends for her past behavior. She began working quietly for charities that helped service workers and military veterans. She donated money anonymously and volunteered her time without seeking publicity or recognition for her efforts. The incident at Buckingham Palace became a famous case study used in business schools and ethics courses around the world. Students learned about the consequences of entitled behavior and the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. Years later, Sarah rarely spoke publicly about what had happened in London. When she did give interviews, she always emphasized how much the experience had changed her understanding of herself and other people. She said that getting slapped back by reality was the best thing that ever happened to her. James Thompson eventually left the Queen's Guards and became a military instructor training new soldiers in discipline and professionalism. He often told the story of the American tourist as an example of how proper training and character could help soldiers handle any situation with dignity. The incident became a permanent reminder that actions have consequences regardless of wealth or status. Sarah had learned that respect must be earned through behavior, not bought with money.